Hey guys, this is Jeremy with Patrick & Friends Music Company, and today we're going to talk about music production for beginners. Specifically, we're going to discuss 4 essential plugins that you should be using in all of your productions and that should come standard in whatever DAW you're using. Those plugins are EQ, compression, reverb, and delay. This video is going to be about reverb, so if you want to learn about those other 3 plugins, make sure to follow the channel. So what is reverb? Reverb is what happens when a sound is produced in a room, it strikes a hard surface like a wall, and then gets reflected back at the listener. It's not really a defined echo, it's more of a wash of sound coming from every corner of a room. In music production, you use reverb to create a sense of depth and space. So you can place some sounds really far away from a listener and some sounds really close to a listener. You can use reverb to emulate the sound of an actual room where the music is being performed, or you can get creative and make all sorts of ambient spaces that couldn't possibly exist in reality. Let's go over to the computer and I'll show you what I mean. All right, so what I've done is I've imported this drum loop off of Splice and brought it into Logic. This is the same drum loop that we've been using in our videos on EQ and compression. So if you're interested in those topics, definitely go check out those videos as well. So after those 2 plugins in the signal chain, I've also thrown in an instance of Logic's stock reverb plugin. Now, as I've said in the other videos, I'm using Logic because it's the DAW that I'm most comfortable in, but whatever DAW you're using should have some kind of reverb built into it. If by chance you happen to be using one of the DAWs that does not come with its own reverb, there are a lot of really great free plugins on the internet that you can download, and we'll put some links to those below. Now, before we actually get into working this reverb plugin, I should also mention there are numerous different kinds of reverb. There are plate reverbs, there are spring reverbs, room reverbs. They can do everything from emulating real physical spaces to creating insane ambient textures. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to cover every single distinct kind of reverb, but we are just going to get a basic understanding of the main control functions that you would find in most, if not all, reverbs. If you do want us to get more specific and you're interested in learning all about the many different kinds of reverb, definitely let us know in the comments and we'll see if we can put something like that together. In that same spirit, I'm probably not going to get into this modulation panel over here. I really just want to get you comfortable with the very basics of reverb. So the first panel that we're actually going to take a look at is over here on the right. This is the output panel, and you'll notice that it has this dry and wet meter section. Now, in audio processing, a dry signal is a signal that has no processing on it whatsoever, no effects, and a wet signal is the signal with the effects on it. On your reverb plugin, you may actually have this section just as a single dry wet knob, where turning the knob to 0 is 100% dry, turning the knob to 100 is 100% wet, and then 50-50 would be somewhere in between. Logic's reverb plugin is kind of nice in that it lets you individually control these 2 signals. So right now, if I were to press play, all we would be hearing is 100% dry. This is the drums with absolutely no reverb whatsoever. That's a dry signal. So if we were to start to bring up the wet control, that would bring the reverb in. You'll notice that I have all of these settings over here set to 0, or basically just the lowest possible settings you can reach on any of them. This is going to produce an incredibly short, incredibly small reverb that almost sounds like an echo. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the drum sample without any reverb on it whatsoever. I'm going to slowly drag the reverb in, and then I'm going to pull the drums out afterwards so that you can hear just the reverb with no drums at all. So here we go. Again, this is no reverb. And now I'm going to slowly bring it in. And again, it's going to be really short, really quiet. It'll almost sound like phasing. It's going to be like a really quick echo. So right now you can hear the drums, 100% of the drums, and 100% of the reverb. So now I'm going to pull out the drums, and all we will hear is the reverb output of this plugin. So, like I said, this reverb is really short, really fast. It sounds basically just like a second, like a photocopy of the drums being placed almost immediately after they happen. And what we're going to do is we're going to use these four knobs to start to change the sound of the reverb. So, as I've kind of mentioned, the purpose of a reverb is to create a sense of physical space within a mix. So you would use it to kind of place all of the different instruments that you're using in one cohesive space. You can set some instruments farther back in the space by adding a lot of reverb. You can set some instruments closer to the listener, and that is all controlled by these settings over here. These will affect both the sound source's location in the room, its proximity to the listener, and just the characteristics of the room itself. The first control we're going to work with is the pre-delay control. So again, when we just play the reverb, and I'll even drag in the drums themselves, they're happening so close together, the reverb is activating so quickly that they're almost happening at the exact same time. What pre-delay does is it basically delays the start of the reverb. So imagine you're in a room, you hit a drum, and the sound sort of fills up the whole space, and then it hits into all of the walls and then reflects back at you. What the pre-delay does is it changes, I guess, essentially how close you are to that wall. So right now we're as close as we can possibly be, where we're hearing them almost at the exact same time. If we were to stand farther away from the wall, it would take more time for the sound to travel to you. So what you're going to hear is the drum, and then a little bit afterwards, the reverb. And you'll notice as you increase the pre-delay, it takes longer for the sound to get to you. And you can get really crazy with it so that it almost ends up feeling like a delay plugin itself. So I think I'm going to set it probably pretty fast. Keep it somewhere around here. So the next control we're going to look at is the reflectivity knob. And for this, I'm actually going to pull the drums themselves out of the mix completely, just so that we're only listening to reverb and we can hear how the reflectivity knob is affecting the sound of the reverb. So with the pre-delay, we've already set how close we are to the wall, how quickly the very first reflections are going to reach our ears. Now what we want to do is change how much the sound is actually bouncing around the room as a whole. So when you hit the drum and the sound goes out into the room, does it then start to bounce off of walls into other walls? And basically we're going to change how long the tail of this reverb is. So again, right now we're at 0% reflectivity. So we're only hearing the first reflection that sort of comes at us. And as we raise this, you'll start to hear a bunch of echoes happening after that initial echo. And it all kind of builds and builds on itself. I'm going to pull it back. Maybe around here, actually. It's 41 again. So the next knob we're going to mess with is the size knob. As I'm sure you can guess, the size knob sort of emulates changes in the size of the room itself that you're placing all of these sounds in. We've sort of configured how close to the first reflection point you are. We've decided how reflective the walls themselves are, how much sound they pass between themselves. The size knob changes how far away from each other the walls are. And so what that means is as we increase the size value, it's going to space out all of the reflections we hear. So right now it's at its smallest possible value, and all of those reflections are really close together. But if we were to space them out, you hear them all. It sounds a lot more like just a delay, a conventional delay. I think I'm gonna Probably gonna have it pretty, yeah, like that. So the last section that we're going to look at is the density time knob. What this is going to do is it's going to take all of these perfect crystal clear reflections that we've made inside of this room, and it's going to start to diffuse them. So normally if you were to, again, hit a drum in a room, the sound would not often come back to you as just a perfect reflection of the sound of a drum. You know, depending on the materials that the walls are made out of, depending on how much furniture you have in the room, the sound usually hits you more diffuse. It's more scattered. The reflections are less clear. And that's what the density time knob is going to do. So right now it just sounds like snare drums on snare drums, echoing and echoing. And then this is how you're going to get that washy sort of sound of reverb. You can already tell it's a lot less clear. And the more you add, the more sort of abstract and washy it gets. I think I'm gonna pull it down. I kind of like that. It sounds really like woomphy. And now that we've gotten a reverb sound that I like, I think I'm going to bring the drums back in. Remember, we have not been listening to any actual drums at all, just the reverb that this plugin is going to send out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the drums in, and then I'm going to pull the reverb down to a level that I think is appropriate. Now, 100% reverb, unless you're being really creative and you're making some sound design ideas that you really like that involve using heavy reverb, that's fine. But normally you're going to use so much less reverb than this. Honestly, you would just want just a touch, and I'm going to bring it in to show you what I mean. So this is the reverb with no drums, and we're going to add the drums in. So right now with 100% reverb, it kind of sounds way too wet. You sort of sound like you're under a bridge or something playing the drums. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to slowly bring this down. Yeah, I think that's good. And again, your first instinct might be to have way more reverb, somewhere around 50, 40, but most of the time, less reverb is more. Reverb has a problem of sort of muddying up a mix. It fills up all of the space really quickly with just a little bit. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to A/B this signal. I'm going to play it with reverb and then without reverb, just so that you can kind of get a feel for how it has changed the sound of the drums. So this is with the reverb on. This will be more noticeable if you're wearing headphones, I should say. And now I'm going to take the reverb off. And you can tell that the drums just kind of sound a little flatter. They're not as full. I'll bring it back in. Honestly, this might even be too much reverb, but if we were to then start adding other instruments on, it would cover it up a little bit. But here, I'm gonna A/B it one more time. No reverb. And now I'm gonna turn the reverb on. I might even pull this down a little bit. So I hope that gives you kind of a basic understanding of what all of these controls do on a reverb. Like I said, there are so many different types of reverbs, and your interface may not look exactly like this one. The dry wet might look different. You might have a couple more or a couple less knobs on the main panel, but basically pre-delay, reflectivity, size, density, time, these are all controls that you'll find for the most part on any reverb. And I just hope that having a little more knowledge of all of them will make you more comfortable with whatever Reverb plugin you're using. So those are the basics of Reverb. Hopefully, the next time you use it in your DAW, you won't feel overwhelmed because you now know what all of the different controls can do. If you'd like a more detailed tutorial on how to use Reverb in your mixes, let us know in the comments. And for more music lessons, subscribe to Patrick & Friends Music Company.